I've seen this happen more than once. Someone clears out an estate or a closet. They find an old mantel clock nobody's wound in years. It looks like nothing more than old furniture. They sell it at a yard sale for $5. Someone else picks it up. That person actually knows what to look for. That same clock turns out to be worth hundreds, sometimes thousands, by the time they get it home. The clock never changed. What changed was who was looking at it. This whole category runs wider than almost anything I've covered, anywhere from $50 to $500,000. It all depends on what you know to check. Start with Gilbert. It's the name most people already have without knowing it. William Gilbert built clocks out of Winsted, Connecticut for decades. Gingerbread cases, steeple cases, plain black mantel styles. He made a lot of them, so they're genuinely common today. A working Gilbert clock in honest shape usually sells for $65 to $275. That's modest money, but it's real money. It's a good starting point before we get into anything rarer. Gilbert started in the clock business back in 1828, buying into a factory with his brother-in-law before settling in Winsted, and the company kept making clocks well into the 20th century. That's exactly why so many of these are still sitting in attics and hallway closets today. Ingraham sits right next to Gilbert in that same price range, but it has a better story. Elias Ingraham worked out of Bristol, Connecticut. He's the man credited with designing the sharp-pointed steeple case. That's the tall Gothic arch shape you've probably seen without knowing it had a name. A clean example with its original label, especially the patented models from the 1880s, sells in that same $65 to $275 range. But a documented early steeple in excellent shape can climb higher. Ingraham stayed in business well into the 20th century, too. That means you'll find both genuinely early pieces and later, more common ones carrying the exact same name. The label inside is really the only thing that tells them apart. Here's something worth knowing before we go any further, because the shape of the case itself is doing more work than most people realize. American shelf clocks moved through a fairly clear line of styles over the decades, and learning to spot a few basic shapes can narrow a clock down to within a few decades, even before you've opened the case or found a label. A slender case with turned columns points early. A tall, sharp Gothic arch points toward the Ingraham steeple era. A flatter, wider black case points later, into the early 1900s. It's not a perfect tool, but it's free, and it works from clear across the room. Seth Thomas is where the real detective work starts to pay off. This company made clocks for close to 200 years. That means the range inside just this one name is huge. But there's a simple trick for narrowing it down fast. Read the label inside the case. If it says Plymouth Hollow, that clock is from before 1865. If it says Thomaston, it's from 1865 or later. That's the exact year the town renamed itself after Seth Thomas. 2 words on a paper label just did the work of a research trip. One thing worth watching for, though. If the label looks too fresh or too clean for how old the case is, or if you can see signs it's been pasted back down at some point, that's usually a replacement, not the original, and a replaced label can quietly undo everything else you thought you knew about the clock. The material tells its own story, too. The earliest movements were made of wood. The company switched to brass around 1842. Starting in 1882, they introduced a plastic-like veneer called adamantine. An 1880s Seth Thomas in mahogany and adamantine, cleaned and running, has sold for around $550. A large, early example in excellent shape has reached $2,000. Even a rougher clock from around 1905, missing its pendulum and not running, has still sold for about $150. That's the range this one name covers. $150 on the low end, $2,000 and up on the high end. The only real difference is whether anyone bothered to actually check the details. New Haven and Waterbury are two more Connecticut names from this same era. They add a different clue into the mix: the serial number. These later makers stamped a serial number right onto the movement. Matching that number against the right chart narrows a clock down to a specific handful of years, sometimes even tighter. It's worth checking the style of that number too. A number that looks too new or too old for the clock's age is one of the clearest signs of a mismatched or altered piece. Waterbury built its reputation on affordable, reliable clocks sold into ordinary homes by the thousands. That keeps most surviving examples in that same honest $65 to $200 range. Solid clocks, not showpieces. And that's not even the maker with the most dramatic range of all. Ansonia is where things get genuinely flashy. The company started in Connecticut and later moved to Brooklyn. Ansonia leaned hard into ornate cast metal cases, figural clocks with full sculpted figures on top, and what collectors call crystal regulators, cases built almost entirely from glass panels. A basic Ansonia in working shape sits in that same everyday range as everything else so far, but the figural and statue clocks have sold for $400 to $1,500. Clocks, housed in genuine Royal Bond porcelain cases, have brought $300 to $800 on their own. Ansonia also made what collectors call mystery clocks, where the pendulum appeared to swing with no visible connection to the mechanism at all, a real visual trick that still draws serious collector interest today. Ansonia stopped making clocks in America in the late 1920s. That means the supply of these has been fixed for almost a century now. Nothing new is entering the market to compete with it. Every name so far has been a Connecticut factory clock, made by the thousands. That's exactly why the next one feels like such a different animal. The pillar and scroll clock is a style Eli Terry helped create in the early 1800s. It's the earliest true American factory shelf clock, and it looks the part. A slender mahogany case, turned columns flanking the door, a scrolled arch top, and a hand-painted glass panel beneath the dial. A worn example in working shape has sold for around $600. A fine, fully restored one with its original label, weights, and pendulum has brought between $6,800 and nearly $10,000. If you ever come across a case built like that, slender columns, arched top, painted glass, stop. Look at the label before you assume it's just another old shelf clock. One documented example even came with a receipt from an authentication done back in 1987. It was priced at just under $4,000 at that time. The value on genuinely early, well-kept pieces has only gone up since then. Not every valuable clock in this story is even American. French carriage clocks are small, brass-cased travel clocks with a folding handle on top. American stores imported them throughout the 1800s. The real names to know are Drocourt, Henri Jacquot, and Margane. On these, the dial usually shows the store's name, not the actual maker. The real identification happens on the back of the movement, where the true maker stamped their mark. A basic working example brings $200 to $600. Adding a minute repeater, a small lever that chimes out the exact time on demand, adds another $500 to $2,000 on its own. A Drocourt with a real grand sonnery striking mechanism and its original enamel panels intact has sold for $8,000 to $15,000. The original travel case that came with it matters too. A carriage clock without its case is worth considerably less than one that still has it. And right at the very top of this whole category sits a tier most people will never personally own, but it's worth knowing it exists. Clocks by the great early English makers, names like Thomas Tompion, Joseph Knibb, and George Graham, have sold for over $200,000. The very top of the entire antique clock market reaches past $500,000 for the rarest, most important pieces. Nobody's finding one of those in an attic. But it shows you just how far this whole category actually stretches once you understand what you're looking at. Whether a clock actually runs changes the price on every single name in this story too. A clock that keeps good time when you wind it is worth meaningfully more than the same clock sitting silent with a cracked mainspring or a missing pendulum, sometimes 30 to 50% more. It costs nothing to wind one up and just listen before you decide what you've got. Here's what ties every single one of these together. It comes down to the same handful of things every time. The label, read carefully instead of just glanced at. The case shape, since it alone can place a clock within a few decades before you even open it. The movement material, wood or brass, hand-filed or machine-cut. That last part is worth knowing on its own. Movements made before, about 1870, usually show real file marks and slightly uneven hand fitting if you look closely at the gears. Movements made after that tend to show clean, machine-cut teeth, evenly spaced every single time, because that's around when factories switched over to doing it by machine instead of by hand. And the serial number, when there is one, matched against the right year. None of that takes an expert. It just takes actually looking, instead of assuming a clock is only worth what it looks like sitting on a shelf, collecting dust. A plain black case can hide a genuine early movement inside it. A beautifully carved case can just as easily sit on top of a completely ordinary one. That's exactly why the outside was never the part actually worth trusting. My husband has walked past the clock in our own hallway for 15 years and never once asked who made it, which tells you exactly how this test usually goes, even in a house that talks about this stuff constantly. So, before an old clock ends up donated or sold for nothing, open the case first. Read the label. Check whether the case shape matches an early style or a later one. Wind it and listen for whether it still runs. Look for a serial number if the movement has one. Tell me down in the comments what kind of old clock you've got sitting in your own house. Have you ever actually checked the label inside it? I have a feeling a few of you are about to go look tonight. And if you're not subscribed yet, hit that button and turn on notifications, because there's another one of these coming soon, and it's going to be worth checking too.